Art. According to the Oxford Dictionary, it is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. What I believe to be one of the most beautiful parts about art in general is the fact that it is indeed subjective. In other words, the same painting, the same sculpture, the same building, they all can and probably will be loved by different people for different reasons. What this basically means is that art is, in itself, limitless, and artists are free to express themselves in whichever way they please. And it is only common knowledge that beauty and aesthetics are anything but objective. As a result, throughout the years, there have been many artistic movements, each with its own style, rules, principles, and message. And not one of them is considered superior to the others in the eyes of history. Now, my dear viewer, you're probably wondering what does all of this got to do specifically with video game graphics? Well, although initially it is hard to draw the connections, the points I just made actually bring up a pretty big problem of mine regarding the gaming community. The common conception among gamers is that graphics can be objectively measured, to the point that their beauty and worth is meticulously valued and compared. And if you don't believe this is the case, then please answer me one question. Do you think that the graphics of Minecraft and those of The Witcher 3 have the same quality and value? Most gamers I personally know would be offended that I even put the graphics of these two games in the same sentence, let alone implying that they're on the same level. And yet, why must this be the case? Why, in the eyes of most people, this is undeniably better than this? Well, get ready, my precious viewer, because we're about to find out. It was the year 1985. Back to the Future was doing great in the box office. Music tapes, and buying music at all, was still a thing, and Nintendo revolutionized the gaming industry by releasing the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Not to be outdone, Sega followed soon thereafter and released its own console, the Mega Drive, which, in general, had better hardware and stats than its competitor. The company, however, needed a way to convey this superiority to the public in a way that could be easily understood. After all, saying that you have a Motorola 6800 7.6 MHz CPU doesn't really sound that appealing. Finally, the Mega Drive was released to the public with two big words printed right in front of the console: 16-bit. This, believe it or not, was the beginning, the planting of the seed that grew into the graphics culture that we have today. In reality, bits are just basic units of information, and they are far from being the only determining factor in the quality of a game's graphics. But even then, the campaign was a genius move by Sega's part. All that people saw was that the Mega Drive's 16 was bigger than the NES's 8, and then when they realized that the former was indeed capable of producing more advanced graphics than Nintendo's console, they just accepted bits as measurement units for quality of graphics. From that point onward, bits assumed a very big importance not only in the eyes of consumers, but also in those of the manufacturers. Consoles began to be sold purely on their graphics and processing power, instead of focusing on the games themselves. Now, two, in my opinion, are the big issues that derive from this situation. On one hand, it twisted the definition that the public had of graphics themselves. Now, as long as your bits were higher than those of your opponent, you were always superior. But this is not necessarily the case. Sure, while a console with 16 bits is technically capable of producing better looking sprites than its competitor, it is what you do with those sprites that count. To this day, I still think that Mega Man looks a lot better than most of the games in the Mega Drive's gallery, even with its measly 8 bits. And again, we come back to the subject of aesthetics, which are always going to be subjective. But the biggest problem came with the release of the dumbest named console of all time, the Nintendo 64. This is when the misconception of the public made a turn for the worse. People thought that 64 bits meant 3D graphics, which in turn meant that anything that was not 3D, which had less bits, would be inferior. So, for a while, anything that was not 3D was considered old, and this made an impact so huge in the gaming industry that its effects are still felt to this day. Mainly, many franchises ruined themselves trying to convert their gameplays into this new standard of graphics, but failed miserably. A prime example of this being the mascot of the company that started it all, Sonic the Hedgehog. And even today, any game with 2D graphics and particularly platformers are always underrated and underappreciated when it comes to their visuals. This is due to the fact that the concept of a maximum potential for graphics is still alive and well, and it has only evolved. From 3D, now the ideal for visuals is realism. And yet, it is obvious that this doesn't make any sense. Aesthetically, you simply cannot claim that realism is above everything else. And functionally, it has been proven that in many cases, realistic graphics just don't complement certain styles of gameplay, and just come off as unclear and confusing. This makes a good segue toward my final point regarding the console wars. Making again the parallel with art, we can say that the first consoles were the equivalent of the scribbles of cavemen. In other words, even if art will always be subjective, it is undeniable that so early into the medium it is going to be limited to a certain extent. But years later, when the form has been mastered, artists can go back to this early style of painting and give it a whole new meaning, utilizing it not because they can't do any better, but because they see a further value in it. In the same way, many games today have retro-style graphics, but it is clear that they are not limited anymore. They willingly choose this style because they feel like it's the one that fits the game better. And what does fit the game better truly mean? It is important to note that the visuals of a video game not only have an aesthetic objective, but they also have a practical one. In this regard, graphics can be compared to the architecture of a building. Not only do they have to be pretty, but they also have to be clear and easy to understand. Plus, in many ways, the visuals of a video game are the foundation upon which its gameplay, story, music, and feel are built upon. A prime example of this that immediately comes to mind is Undertale. In the spirit of not spoiling anything, let's just say that the game was specifically made to be a 2D retro-style story-driven game, and it would just not work with any other style of graphics. And yet, even with its pixelated visuals, it is still regarded by many as one of the best games of 2015, if not of all time. So clearly, that had to be something that Toby Fox was doing right. So finally, after all of these considerations, I would like to go back to the example that I've made at the beginning of this video. I want to see if the points that I've made really reached and resounded with you, or if they didn't, so I will pose the question once more. Considering that graphics determine and must serve the gameplay and the feeling of a game, and considering that aesthetics are always going to be subjective, do you think that the graphics of Minecraft and those of The Witcher 3 have the same quality in visuals? Is one superior to the other? Please leave your answer in the comments. I'm pretty interested and would like to start a fruitful conversation around this topic. For now, thank you so much for watching, and remember to keep your knowledge up. Wait, don't go just yet! After editing the video, I realized that I forgot one very important point. Well, actually, I didn't exactly forget it, but I didn't explain it nearly as well as I could have. So, to finish up the video, let us talk about performance. Some might have thought that they could debunk most of the points that I've made by simply pointing out that in many of the settings of their games, there's the option to up the quality of the graphics, which has to mean that graphics can objectively become better. And to those, I say that it is very important to note that performance and graphics are two entirely different things. Basically, any game with its settings of maximum has the graphics that the developers initially intended it to have, and anything else is just intentional handicap to make the game run smoother. So yes, graphics can have a maximum potential, but it is limited to every individual game, and it cannot be applied as a general rule. To illustrate this point better, we can just go back to the example I've made many times in this video, between Minecraft and The Witcher 3. Even if Minecraft is running at maximum settings on the best computer in the world, and The Witcher 3 is running only on medium settings, the comparison stays mostly the same. That's because what's changing is not the visuals themselves or their style, but simply their performance. Alright, I think that's actually all. Thank you once again for watching, and hey, how about checking out the other video that I've made? It's about Pokemon, so yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to leave your opinion in the comments, and for real this time, remember to keep your knowledge